Hey, everybody. Welcome back. We're having yet another stream. Wednesdays we do it a little bit later because we have our members check-in for CPI. We have a call every Wednesday night. And so it's good that we have our members check-in. And now it's good that I'm here. So we're going to have yet another great late night chat. Let's go.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to do yet another one of our great late night conversations. There are three ways to send questions for the second half of the show. You can do a Rumble rant. That's fine. You can cash at me at CalebMoppin22, but the best way to send a question is buy me a coffee. If you got something you want me to talk about, send me a buy me a coffee. Great way to ask. Now, the way we do things on this stream is first I give my opening remarks, then I do the roll call where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. Then after that, I answer your questions. So send questions for the second half of the show. Announcements. October 4th, we are having a national day of action for continuing the peace talks with Russia. That will be coming up on October 4th. We're going to have people all across the country join the Center for Political Innovation to get involved. No one is doing what we're doing. Nobody. It's really amazing the amount of activism that we do. And, get involved. Join cpiusa.org. We're always doing great stuff. People who get involved. We just had a great members check-in. One of our members talked about she joined because we gave her stuff to do. We plugged her in. And we are serious. We're doing stuff. We're out there. We're organizing. We're connecting with people. We're the real deal. So join the Center for Political Innovation. Join us in the streets October 4th to support peace with Russia. And as I said before, there are three ways to send questions for the second half of the show. You can send questions as Rumble rants. You can send questions as super chats, or you can send them the best way, which is buy me a coffee. Buy me a coffee is the best way, the absolute best way to send questions for the second half of the show. And you all have been doing great like that. You all have been asking more questions, and I appreciate it because that, keeps this machine rolling on, right? So I appreciate it. Always appreciated. We are go. We are building. And, I am really proud of everything. So send a question for the second half of the show. When I answer the question, buy me a coffee is the best way to send the question. So anyhow, glad you're all here tonight. So as I mentioned last night, one of our members, Noah Shank, who is our East Coast regional leader, he's based in Boston, and he's also based, he just recently went to Nizhny Novgorod, which is the city. It's an industrial city in Russia. And he was there for two events, for the World Youth Festival, which is a great gathering that CPI has been participating in for quite some time. It's a tradition that goes back to the Soviet Union time, and I went to the first one of them in 2013, and then I went in 2017, and then I was there in 2024. Noah was there this year it was the World Youth Festival Council, like a smaller gathering that they had this year. And we are all about World Youth Festivals. They represent really the best of the anti-imperialist tradition. And then Intervision, right? So Russia was kicked out of Eurovision, even though they're part of Europe. They were kicked out of Eurovision, but Israel is able to participate in Eurovision. Unbelievable. So Russia, because they were kicked out of Eurovision, they launched their own alternative, which was for the entire planet, global. And it's called Intervision. And it's global, and no Americans participated. There were 2 Americans who were Australian citizens who wanted to participate, but they were bullied and threatened out of doing so. Unbelievable, but it was an amazing song competition, historic, where all kinds of countries were there, and Vietnam won Intervision. It was won by the Socialist Republic of Vietnam. They won, and many people pointed out that Russia really won because countries from all over the world came and participated in this amazing historic song competition in Russia. And Noah was there as an American at Intervision, and he was also at the World Youth Festival. And while he was at the World Youth Festival, he got to interview Cynthia McKinney, who is a good friend of ours, former U.S. Congresswoman from the state of Georgia. The first vote I ever cast for president was in 2008. I voted for Cynthia McKinney. She was running on the Green Party ticket against Barack Hussein Obama, and I voted for Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. She was the anti-imperialist candidate, former member of the House of Representatives who had a record of speaking up about anti-imperialism. And it was really, really an honor to vote for Cynthia McKinney. It was really, really great. I'm really, really glad that we voted for Cynthia McKinney. And and that now Cynthia McKinney, she did an interview with Noah while she was at the World Youth Festival. She was a speaker. She's been in Russia a lot lately. So I'm just going to show this video. I mean, shout out to Noah. If you're watching, Noah, you represented us well. You did a great job. You're going to love this video, folks. This is Noah in Nizhny Novgorod at the World Youth Festival and at Intervision, the historic song competition in Russia. Here we go.
Hello, where are you from?
Hi, my name is Noah. I'm from the United States of America.
Oh, cool. Are you coming from America to here just to see Intervision?
Well, actually, I came for the World Youth Festival. I'm representing an organization, an NGO called the Center for Political Innovation, and I was invited to come to Intervision, and I thought it was an amazing opportunity. So we are here at the World Youth Festival Assembly in Nizhny Novgorod 2025 with former Congresswoman, a personal hero of mine, Cynthia McKinney. So what brings you out to Nizhny Novgorod?
Well, actually, the World Youth Festival. And this is my first visit to any of those festivals. I know that they have a glorious history, but I haven't been a part of them. Of you have been.
I have, yes. Yes, last year I was able to attend. It was a wonderful experience.
So I'm hoping that maybe I'll get a chance to come next year. Hopefully. Right now I'm teaching at a university in Bangladesh. And so I don't tell very many people that I'm originally from the United States, but I think they can kind of tell by my accent.
Well, you can do it right now. We have 5 or 7 minutes to just wipe and then go and make serious stuff. But now, just dance.
Второй день, когда пришли у нас в общину и церковь, сразу пошли.
Мне кажется, что кружится моя голова. Мой мармеладный, я не прав. Вы можете громче 100%. Попробуй, мама, попробуй, чага-чага.
So you recently got back from the Donbass. You did a humanitarian
my
issue
goodness,
there.
how did you hear about that?
I saw it on RT, I must confess. So would you mind talking about that a little bit and your experience?
Well, I have to be honest with you. There's so many parallels between the Donbass and Gaza, and I didn't know about it. I didn't realize they were targeting children, targeting civilians. I mean, I understood that there was aggression against the Russian-speaking population, which is veritably all of the people in the Donbass. But I just, for some reason, I didn't get it. And so then they took us to the memorial for the dead children, and then from there we went to one other smaller city where thousands of young people were targeted. I think hundreds were killed, but thousands were targeted, so they were hurt, maimed, and lived with those injuries. The civilians were targeted, and it was exactly the same situation. So it appears to me that Zelensky equals Netanyahu.
They're very, very similar. And likewise, right. There's a cancel culture around both of the issues. You're not allowed to talk about Ukraine, you're not allowed to talk about Israel and the crimes that they commit against those people. And you've been a victim of cancellation because of that.
That's right. Yeah. Exactly. And so now, but the interesting thing is that I was doing what I was doing 25 years ago, and now I'm getting messages from my ex account saying, hey, you know, I thought you were a kook back then, but you really are a patriot. You were right all the while. And, you know, so the truth wears well. That's one lesson to learn from this, that it never is bad to tell the truth. Secondly, telling the truth incurs a cost because people don't want really to know, or the powers that be don't want their crimes exposed. But we have to expose those crimes. And that's why the whole situation, everyone's talking about Charlie Kirk. Well, I'll add my voice that Charlie Kirk's voice, which I ignored in the beginning because he was not reflective of my voice. But that's right. But now, as he began to question his own previous positions, his voice parallels my voice in many ways, and he has now paid the ultimate sacrifice. And that is wrong. That is absolutely wrong. So people are talking about Charlie Kirk. People are also talking about Jeffrey Epstein. And we have a president sitting in the White House who made certain promises about truth, transparency, and governance, and we're not getting any of it. So we have to raise our voices again. And I'm going to get back out there and I'm going to raise my voice, but this time I have more rich experiences from here in Russia, and I know that everything that the powers that should not be have told me about Russia.
With all of these huge sort of youth festivals and gatherings, as well as Intervision, the music, cultural events and stuff like that, there's always a lot of warm emotions, tons of people coming together, joined by a common goal, which is peace and friendship. And another thing I will add is that I've observed so many young people in Russia, thousands of young people who are willing to volunteer their time, who are willing to go sleepless nights because they love their country. And that's something that's almost foreign to me in the U.S. It's very common to be pessimistic and sad about the future, and that's not what I see at all here. I see so many bright young people who are willing to make a brighter future.
Wow, which singer are you supporting today?
I guess there was an American singer called Brandon Howard. So obviously I'm rooting for him. I'm a little bit patriotic, but I'd love to hear all the voices here. There, with Intervision, it's not like Eurovision where it's simply, Western Europe. It's every country from around the world, or many of them. The global South is represented, the global majority, and that'll be amazing to hear so many different cultures come together to support friendship internationally.
Wow, cool. Have you heard or seen Chinese singer performance?
I've seen like stuff on like TikTok and stuff like that. I know some songs from like the Cultural Revolution, but I don't know any like modern Chinese songs, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, what do you want to say to the singer you are supporting for?
Good luck out there. Yeah, I hope you do well. Yeah, that's about it.
That's cool. Thank you for your answer.
No problem.
Thank you.
Does it get frustrating being that person who tells the truth, who sees through the lies, and then 20 years later you're hearing from people we used to know telling you right?
In the interim, what I've done is I've taught probably about 1,000. I've gone through 1,000 undergrads, and graduate students at my university in Bangladesh. And as a result of that, I get my spirits are lifted literally almost every day because my students are the ones now coming to tell me, and it doesn't take them 25 years. They're coming and they're telling me, you changed the way I see politics. And so now there's a more immediate effect, and my students are actually acting in a way that is reminiscent of the way I acted as I was coming up as well. So if we can have more people who will speak their truth, no matter what the consequences are, and they expect to pay a consequence, that's great, because then we can have more authentic leaders, and the leaders will be true to the populations that they are supposed to serve.
That was really well put. Thank you, Cynthia.
Okay.
It was really nice.
Thank
You're a
you.
hero. You're a hero. Yeah, music does unite people, and I think this could be a wonderful opportunity for a more international alternative to Eurovision. I understand there's even an American performing, Brandon Howard, I think his name is. I'm not terribly familiar with him. He's comparing himself to Michael Jackson. I'm a little skeptical of that. Michael Jackson is a legend, but I think it could be a wonderful opportunity for our countries to come together, as well as other countries. There are many other countries from the global south that are participating in this, the global majority, and that's a wonderful opportunity for their voices to be heard, because so often in Western media they are ignored.
Творческое состязание на протяжении многих лет объединяло талантливых исполнителей.
I can think of a song. There was a song composed for the original World Youth Festival in 1947. It's one of my favorite American folk songs. From the song, or? Okay, yeah. It was like, tomorrow is a highway broad and we are the many who will travel there. Tomorrow is a highway broad and fair, and we are the many who will build it there, and we will build it there. I'll work on it. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, Noah did an amazing job. He represented us very, very well. Met people from around the world. Absolutely. Great interviews he gave. Great conversations he had with people. Great interview with Cynthia McKinney. He distributed to people from the African continent our book on Ibrahim Traore. He distributed to people from the Middle East our book on the Houthis. He was telling people all about our organization and our effort to build an anti-imperialist organization among the masses of the American people. And he was engaging with people from all across the world. Bravo, Noah. Great job. Great job. Great work, Noah. We applaud you. We're really glad you were able to represent us at the World Youth Festival and at Intervision. Very exciting. Keep an eye out for the articles coming up on the CPI website about these events. Keep an eye out for them. We're going to have updates on everything. Noah's working on an article about Intervision and all kinds of stuff. We're moving ahead, folks. We are doing great things. Our organization, we have the best people, and we are getting shit done. Look, Noah, you are beloved by our community. Look at this. This is great. This is awesome. And we are so happy. And CPI, we will put you to work. We will send you places. We will get you doing things. This is not a spectator sport. It is not a spectator sport. Let me put it that way. Dare to struggle, dare to win. That is the CPI attitude. That is the CPI attitude. We do have an article on the website about the origin story of CPI. And so I would encourage you to give it a read if you want to know who we are and where we came from, because there seems to be a lot of confusion about it. Go ahead and read that article, maybe bookmark it to read it later. We're going to have a lot more material like that coming out, just kind of going over the history of who we are, what we do, what we've done, what we believe, the struggles and that we've been through, etc. Because it's an important thing. And it's not just the story of me, it's the story of us. We are a tendency. You could call it. We're a tendency. And as a tendency, we have an origin. We've evolved over the years, and we have been through many different struggles, many important struggles. And we continue building our anti-imperialist movement. Mark your calendar for January 11th. January 11th is going to be the date that we have a nice reception on the East Coast in New Jersey. So I would hope to meet you all there. We'll be having the Eventbrite soon where you can start registering. Obviously, it's only September, so we got time to build and all of that. But January 11th, we're having a special reception in New Jersey. So, I hope to see you all there. I did want to remind you that if you have any questions for the second half of the show, there are 3 ways to send those questions. Questions can be sent, number 1, through Rumble Rant, number 2, through Cash App, Caleb Moppin 22. But the best way, the absolute best way to send super chats or to send questions is through Buy Me a Coffee. And you guys have been doing a great job with that. So keep it up. Get me talking in the second half of the show. Now, a couple things I wanted to touch on. I guess there's 2 points that I'm going to touch on before we open it up and we go to the roll call and questions. One of them is something that David Fox suggested that I talk about on here. Fascism. What is fascism? That's a fair question, because nowadays fascist is a slur that gets used for everybody. Everybody gets called a fascist. If you don't like somebody or if someone's a conservative, you call them a fascist. And the response of conservatives, they say, well, actually, fascism is left-wing. Fascism is the state. It's socialism. And nobody seems to really know what fascism actually is. And one of the great things about the Center for Political Innovation, if you read my book, Where is America Going?, I draw from some of the great Marxist literature out there to give a scientific definition of fascism, an economic explanation of the phenomenon that arose in the 1930s in Italy, or in 1920s in Italy, and 1930s in Germany, that kind of became a defining aspect of Western society in the 1930s that led to the Second World War. What is fascism? And this is something that if you talk to communists, they will generally give you one of three answers. If you talk to communists, right, straight up communists, hammer sickle people, right, if you talk to regular mainstream communists, they will say fascism is the authoritarian right wing, and they see fascism as gradual, right? They argue that, well, it's creeping fascism, that we're gradually moving toward fascism. The more right wing the conservatives become, the more authoritarian, the more fascist they are. And that is the argument that the Communist Party USA has used for decades to urge people to vote for the Democrats. They say the Republicans are fascists, and if the Republicans get in office, they're going to pivot towards fascism. We might all be killed, so we have to vote for the Democrats. Now, that argument may have made some sense in the 1930s. In the 1930s, when, Hitler and Mussolini were in power, and Roosevelt was with one faction of the ruling class that was contending against them, one might be able to argue that there was a big division in the ruling class over how to relate to the Soviet Union and how to relate to Nazi Germany, how to relate to labor unions, etc. But nowadays, that argument is completely absurd. If anything, it is the Democrats that are more authoritarian. It's Joe Biden that was a big supporter of the fascists in Ukraine and pushed the war situation. It was the Democrats that wanted to throw people in jail for disagreeing with them, that raided the homes of the Uhuru movement. So that argument that fascism is the right wing becoming more authoritarian, that is very simplistic, and that is a bunk argument. Now, the second argument that you'll get is from Trotskyites. Trotskyites will say that fascism is a middle-class mobilization against the labor movement. And they'll talk about how there's radical middle-class elements are used to attack labor unions and to attack the working class. And they'll talk about the black shirts of Italy. They'll talk about, the brown shirts, the stormtroopers in Nazi Germany and in Germany prior to the rise of Hitler. And some of the Trotskyites even go as far as saying that fascism is not a government style. It is just a movement. It is just an anti-labor street fighting, anti-labor militia movement or something that is utilized. It is the mobilization of middle-class forces to attack labor unions, etc. There's an element of truth in that, but that's not ultimately correct either. And then the third definition of fascism that you'll get, and this is a definition that's a little bit weird, but it's one that was used by the Communist Party prior to the Popular Front, is that fascism is an attempt to imitate communism by the capitalist state. If someone sounds like a communist, but they're not, they're a fascist. And that was the basis on which they accused the Social Democrats of being fascist, social fascists, etc. Someone sounds like a communist, but they're not, they're a fascist. And that definition is very, very wrong on a number of levels. All of those definitions have an element of truth in them, right? That fascist movements sound kind of like communist movements in some ways. And they often involve attempts to stabilize capitalism with heavy-handed state control. Fascist movements often do draw from middle-class elements, middle-class ideology, and they tend to crush labor unions. So there's some truth in that. Fascism is right-wing in the sense that it is largely oppositional to historical progress in the way that it's implemented, and I'll get to that. So if that's what you consider left-wing and right-wing to be, nowadays left-wing and right-wing are completely confused. But if you're using a really old-fashioned definition of left and right, if the left is social progress, the right is social reaction, you could argue that they're right-wing. All of those definitions are pointing to some aspect of the truth, but they're all wrong. If you want to understand what fascism is, for free, on the internet, you can get the main book that I cite in my book, Where is America Going? The main book that I draw from is this very, very, very important book that you can get for free on the internet, Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. And in this book, Arpalm Dutt gives a definition and understanding of fascism that is rooted thoroughly in economics. And before he can explain what fascism is, he has to explain why the Great Depression is happening. And that the Great Depression is rooted in the breakdown of the capitalist economic system, that the capitalist economic system goes through cyclical crises in which poverty is created by abundance. And that is a central point. And if you don't understand that, you're missing the whole point. And I'm going to put on my socialist math video to just go over this fact, right? Because if you don't understand that capitalism breaks down through its own productivity and that abundance creates poverty, you're missing a big part of how the modern world works. So here, watch this video. We'll talk about this, and then we'll explain what fascism is, economically speaking.
One, about why it is that our Western capitalist economy is crashing and burning. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some math. And I hate math. Do you know why I hate math? Because I grew up in America. I went to public school in the United States of America. So I am going to, at risk of embarrassing myself, because math was never my best subject, I'm going to do some mathematics here on the board for you to explain the problem.
I very much enjoyed Caleb's speech.
So if you are creating a product, right? If you're a factory owner, you're making a product, you are going to need the material through which that product is made, the manufacturing materials. So that'll be A.
The simple equation you put forward to explain the crisis of overproduction and the falling rate of profit.
And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B.
It broke down where your money goes.
You're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C.
Explanations of those concepts that people are able to understand.
Then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that.
I like the fact that he framed it that way to make it very clear.
Which is that the capitalist can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marxism, the understanding of surplus value.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere. I've never been able to explain it that simply.
So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid. And then you have C2, which is the profit that the capitalist makes. And it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an ongoing present problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've invented to try and resolve this problem, but it gets worse. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. Get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. There's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down, right? As C2 decreases, also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that Adam Smith acknowledged. This is something some of the popes even acknowledge. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products because he's making less and less of a profit on the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker never being able to buy back what he produces and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated. And this points to what is understood to be the deeply irrational nature of the capitalist system.
Yeah. The problem is that as capitalism becomes more and more productive, there becomes a problem, which is the ability of the worker to buy back what he produces goes down, and the rate of profit that the capitalist makes on each product also goes down. And so the market inevitably becomes glutted with products that cannot be sold. And as a result, people lose their jobs and the economy becomes less and less stable the more technology advances and the more wealth that is created. It doesn't make any sense. Right now, we are making so much wealth. We are producing more cheese and more tractors and more iPhones and more tires and more cars, and we're producing more stuff than ever. And yet people are getting poorer. The standard of living is going down in the United States. It's not rational. The U.S. government shouldn't be buying, billions of dollars worth of cheese to bury in a cave just to keep the price of dairy high. Self-driving cars shouldn't be a bad thing. It should be a great thing that reduces the amount of human labor power necessary for driving. But in our irrational system, the more productive society becomes, the more unstable society becomes, the more the economy crashes. So when you have a prolonged crisis of overproduction, what do? You have to destroy the means of production. You have to destroy society. What came after the Great Depression? World War II. And World War II destroyed every major city in the Western world, except those in the United States. All of Europe was destroyed. Japan was completely destroyed. Every major city in China was destroyed. And as a result of that, you then got the post-World War II economic expansion. Suddenly the economy could grow again because there was so much destruction. Fascism, if you look at the essence of what Hitler did in Germany, the essence of what he was doing was using degrowth methods to stabilize the German economy. He was destroying the productive forces in order to reboot the economy. And I actually have a video where I talked about this, with Kim Iverson, actually. Maybe I can pull that up. Where, I explained that the nature of fascism is degrowth, right? That what fascist economics is it's reverse inflation. It is reducing the amount of wealth in society in order to get the economy going again. And it's very toxic. It's a very bad thing to do, right? And it has very devastating consequences, and it doesn't work for a really long time. It's a pretty short-term solution. It doesn't really solve the problem. Here, I will show the clip where Kim Iverson asked me to very quickly explain, fascism, World War II. And, I think, since it's always better to have a video. I could just tell you right now, but it's always better to have like an interview or something like that. So this is from my Kim Iverson chat. This is like a short video clip that she made of my chat with her, where she asked me about World War II and what the cause of it was, what the difference between the Nazi economy and the Soviet economy was. So let's just get into this. The economics of fascism. Fascism is an attempt to stabilize capitalism by reducing consumption, by driving down the productive forces, and by grinding the wheels of history backward, essentially. So here we go. Hold on. I'm going to show the Kim Iverson video because this is important, right? This is Kim Iverson asked me. It was funny. I didn't expect this question. It was in the interview about my Trotsky book, but she asked me and I gave an answer.
A lot of discussion right now circling on X about, well, we should have backed Hitler in the war. Have you seen these discussions that have been happening all over? The question, did we side with the wrong side? Should we have opposed Stalin instead?
Well, those discussions were widespread in the lead up to World War II. Harry Truman said on the floor of Congress that if it looks like Stalin is going to win, we should back Hitler. And if it looks like Hitler's going to win, we should back Stalin so we can weaken both countries and we can dominate the world. And the America First Committee, which was a group of a lot of very powerful people that didn't want the USA involved in the Second World War. The German-American Bund had rallies in Madison Square Garden, and there were widespread discussions of that. And there was a divide, and it's interesting. It was the factory owners, the industrialists. They didn't like the labor unions. The labor unions were led by Marxists and communists, and they cut into their profits. And Roosevelt was friendly with the Rockefellers and with the British, that they kind of make their profits by selling oil to the world, by dominating international finance. So the factory owners, they were more sympathetic to the Nazis because the Nazis killed the communists and, got the economy going with all kinds of military spending. Whereas the oil monopolies and the bankers were more sympathetic to Roosevelt because they wanted to maintain their domination. And Germany was a rival that had been beaten down, a country that had been stripped of its colonies after World War I. And then Hitler came to power, and all of a sudden Germany was a power again, and it was seizing territory and claiming new colonies, etc. And so Germany was now a rival once again, and they didn't want to have a rival. And that underlying World War I and World War II was the tension between the economy on the European mainland and the American and British economy that is based on the ocean and global trade, right? The Atlanticist international order versus the economy on the European mainland. And the greatest fear of the British Empire and Wall Street has been the Germans and the Russians getting together. Because if they got together, then that would end British and American domination of the European mainland and possibly of the whole world.
Yeah. And basically what happened was after World War I, Germany, which was a rising imperialist power, was stripped of its colonies. It was forced to pay back a whole bunch of debt to American and British banks. They had, war reparations they had to pay, plus they were borrowing money from the British and the American banks in order to keep going. And their economy wasn't doing too well. And then there was a big communist movement. And so a right-wing street fighting force was created to fight the communists, and it was funded by the British. The British were very afraid of Germany falling into communist hands. And because then they would lose control. If Russia and Germany were together, they would lose control of the European mainland. So the British were backing all kinds of anti-communist street fighting groups. The Nazis were one of these street fighting groups. And as they got bigger, some of the German industrialists, the Krupps, the Tysons, and in particular a financier named Hjalmar Schacht, realized that the Nazis could build kind of an authoritarian state that could be used to prevent communist revolution. So Hitler took power, and when Hitler took power, he took some very, very dramatic moves. The first thing that Hitler did was he broke the labor movement. The Communist Party was outlawed, and the Social Democrat Party was outlawed. And the leaders of these parties were rounded up and put in concentration camps. And there weren't any more strikes, and the labor union leaders were in concentration camps. And so hundreds of thousands of people were put in these concentration camps, and they weren't out looking for jobs. And then a whole bunch of people got hired to build the concentration camps, to be guards in the concentration camps. Then they shamed women out of the workforce. They increased the marriage bonus. So when you got married, the government gave you a big check, right? Cut you a check for getting married. And then they shamed women out of the workforce. The idea was that women who are working are taking jobs away from German men who have kids to feed, etc. They pushed women out of the workforce, so women weren't looking for jobs. And they built a network of prison camps that were used to suppress dissidents and to break the labor movement, so there weren't any more strikes. The concentration camp inmates started doing free labor for corporations, right? Because it was like a subsidy for Volkswagen and other corporations. Then they built these Autobahn highways. They hired a lot of people to build these highways across the country, the Autobahns. And then they restarted military spending. And they did all of that really fast, like boom, 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 boom. And as a result of doing that, the German economy boomed. There was an economic boom for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, 5 years at the most. And they destroyed productive forces. And overall, the country was producing less wealth. And the society, the only job creation was jobs that were destructive. For example, prisons. I mean, yeah, if someone works in a prison, they get a wage, they have a job, but is a prison making society wealthier? No. Military spending. Again, if somebody works in a factory making military hardware, they have a job, but is military hardware making society more productive and prosperous? No. Slave labor. Is slave labor, I guess, if a corporation gets a benefit from slave labor, they get a boost and they have more spending money because they're spending less on, hiring people. But is that productive for the overall economy? So this is a phenomenon we call destructive accumulation, where the capitalist system starts eating itself in order to keep moving, where in order to keep moving, it starts basically destroying itself. It starts replacing industrial wage workers with slave laborers. It starts building a network of concentration camps. It needs to go to war. War becomes permanent. War becomes a necessity, right? You cannot not have war because there's no way to keep the economy rolling again without it. And all of this, you're destroying the productive forces and you're ultimately making society poorer. And this is called degrowth. And that is what fascism is. Fascism is degrowth. Basically, fascism is the military-industrial complex. Fascism is the prison-industrial complex. And basically, when Hitler took power in 1933, he very dramatically built the world's first prison-industrial complex and the world's first military-industrial complex very fast, and he used that to stimulate the economy. And it worked for about 5 years. And then they had to go to war again, and they had to start seizing territory because their economy was slowing down again, and there was an economic meltdown hanging over them. It's degrowth methods, and ultimately, the only way the world economy recovered from the Great Depression was with mass destruction. When capitalism enters a long-term crisis of overproduction, a long-term crisis of the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the only way to get out of it without rationally organizing the means of production, without getting beyond the rule of profits, is with mass destruction. That is the essence of fascism. Fascism is degrowth. Right? And R. Palm Dutt explains this very brilliantly. And who else explains this? Lynn Marcus. Lynn Marcus explains it in this book, Dialectical Economics, right? He explains this. And this is part of the brilliance of CPI. No one talks about this, right? I am very grateful for the fact that my political awakening, my political education came during the financial crisis. When the capitalist economy crashed, 2008, 2009, I was a college student and I was a member of a communist organization, and we set out to study why the capitalist economy crashed. And I took classes from this guy, Fred Goldstein, who wrote this very good book, Low Wage Capitalism, Colossus with a Feet of Clay. He explained it, how the economic crisis was rooted in the high-tech development, and the fact that the capitalist economy had developed with technology and was advancing was leading to an economic fallout because profits are in command and abundance creates poverty in our system. And he explained the housing bubble, he explained all of it. You can read this book for free on the internet. You'll learn all about it. There's another book that explains this that was written in the 1980s. It's called High Tech Low Pay by Sam Marcy, and it talks about this. And yeah, Michael Hudson talks about this. I have not studied Michael Hudson's work, but he talks about this to some degree, right? In addition to that, right, there's a great book a very short book by Nelson Peary called The Future is Up to Us. And you can get this for free on the internet too. The Future is Up to Us, a revolutionary talking politics with the American people. This is a very, very good book that explains the same concepts, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, right? And all of this helped me to understand why the U.S. economy was crashing. And then from there, by reading R. Palm Dutt and reading Lynn Marcus, I was able to understand what degrowth is and how fascism is not a political movement. It's not an ideology. Fascism is what capitalism has to do in order to keep moving when it's faced with a long-term crisis of overproduction. Rosa Luxemburg predicted it, right? Rosa Luxemburg, who was the leader of the socialists and anti-war activists in Germany, this is what she said. 1914, as World War I was breaking out, she said, "This world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of a modern war, but then when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses towards its inevitable consequences. The triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization, as in ancient Rome. Depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery. Fascism is capitalism collapsing into barbarism. That's what fascism is. Capitalism has become so, it is the productive forces have gone so far beyond what the irrational profit-centered system can handle that capitalism is reduced to cannibalizing itself, to grinding down and destroying the productive forces, setting up a slave labor underclass, setting up for a gigantic war and having a big gigantic war to stabilize things. Capitalism goes to full-on degrowth mode in order to keep the economy going because the irrationality of the market is holding back human productivity, and human creativity continues to be restrained by the irrationality of the market. That is what fascism is. And that's my book, Where is America Going?, which is now available in Chinese, right? It's being circulated in Chinese now. Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. I quote Lynn Marcus. I quote Fred Goldstein. I quote Nelson Peary, and I explain all of this, right? And that's what fascism is. Fascism is the breakdown of capitalism because human beings are creative and brilliant, and capitalism drives the industries to keep reinventing and becoming more efficient, and that should lead to a more prosperous society, but it doesn't. It leads to greater and greater economic instability, abundance creating poverty, poverty amid plenty. And the only way that the capitalist system can deal with poverty amid plenty is destruction and becoming cannibalistic. Imperialism was their first attempt to deal with it, but imperialism pretty quickly degenerates into destructive accumulation. And 1930s fascism was the first example of this fourth stage that we're entering, destructive accumulation. And this is part of the brilliance of the Center for Political Innovation. If you read our book, What is Innovationism? Capitalism has gone through 4 stages. First, primitive accumulation. That's where they privatized things. They kicked the peasants off their land. They seized the colonies from the African people and from the indigenous people, the transatlantic slave trade, massive theft to privatize the world, right? The world, the feudal commons and all of that. There was a massive theft and creation of private property on a massive scale that involved, clearing out the Highlanders of Scotland and, executing vagabonds in Britain and land seizures in Ireland. And it was horrendous. Primitive accumulation was when they created private property, and it involved millions of people being killed. That was the first stage of capitalism, the rosy dawn of capitalism. Colonialism, slavery, all of that. Out of that, you got the industrial system, industrialization, which is stage 2. And that's the factory workers are hired to work by the factory owners in industry. And out of industrial capitalism, because it has this problem of overproduction, where you're producing more goods, the wages paid out are never enough to buy back the goods that are produced. And frequently, the economy comes to a grinding halt because too much wealth has been created, this problem of overproduction. it leads that you have to go seize new markets. You have to go seize chunks of the world to buy from you, right? And imperialism, not colonialism, but imperialism, the economic system of imperialism, where you're going around the world and holding back development and destroying productive forces to force developing countries to accept your products, to accept your domination. Imperialism, carving up the world and seizing chunks of the world as captive markets to prevent development. Imperialism is the third stage, monopolistic capitalism, when the state, the government of Western countries, teams up with the corporations to seize big chunks of the world, to impoverish the people, and hold back development in the developing world to make super profits for big bankers in the West. That's the third stage. And imperialism, it eventually degenerates into destructive accumulation. And fascism was the form of destructive accumulation that took power in Germany and Italy, and that was part of the breakdown of capitalism during the Great Depression. There was kind of a reboot because of World War II and all the mass destruction and death of World War II. But then the computer revolution came along, and here we are again. Fascism is rooted in the economics of the capitalist system. And this is so important because there's all this, people think fascism is people being racist. Sometimes fascists are racist. Hitler was racist, but you don't have to be racist to be a fascist. And on top of that, there's plenty of people that are racist that are not fascist, right? Racism is a bad thing, but one can be a fascist and not be a racist, and one can be a racist and not be a fascist. They say fascism is when people are nationalistic. Okay, but there are plenty of people that are nationalistic that are not fascist. The essence of fascism is an economic mode. It is the breakdown of the capitalist system. It is stabilizing the capitalist system with degrowth methods. It's what Rosa Luxemburg was describing here. It is European civilization collapsing into barbarism, the annihilation of civilization, modern war and unlimited war. That's what fascism is. And that is what people need to understand, right? It is not an ideology. It is not a belief system. It is a method of stabilizing capitalism. And Malthusian economics is very much an expression of fascist economics, right? The idea that overpopulation is the problem. We need to reduce consumption, right? We need to decrease the population. We need to reduce consumption among the people, stop the consumption, right? That is what fascists believe, right? The answer is not reducing the population. The answer is rationally organizing the means of production. The answer is the banks, factories, and industries being organized to serve public good and not the profits of a wealthy few. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Let me repeat. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And our 4-point plan at the Center for Political Innovation is 4 points of how we could take control of the government and the state could be utilized to serve public good. If we took control of our oil and our natural resources, if we had a public banking system, right? If we then mobilized the country to go out and build and rebuild the centers of economic power, rebuild the infrastructure of the nation, if we then invested in our population, with healthcare and education, and we started investing in our people, right? We could have an economy that would not have the problems it currently has. But right now, profits are in command. And as long as profits are in command, the system is going to break down under a crisis of overproduction, right? And that really the problem with capitalism is I'm so sick of people thinking that the problem with capitalism is that it's unfair. Life is unfair, right? Feudalism was unfair. Hunter-gatherer civilization was unfair. Slavery is unfair. Communist countries are also very unfair. Unfair shit happens, right? I would like the world to have unlimited abundance and equality for all, but we're not there yet, right? And the problem with capitalism is not that it's unfair. And the problem with capitalism is not that some people are rich. The problem with capitalism is that we have an economic system where the more productive and efficient human labor power becomes, the more impoverished people get. And that we need rational central planning of the means of production to overcome it. That's the issue. And the fact that this is not discussed is very frustrating to me because I spent years studying this. The problem of overproduction, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and that technological advancement should not lead to poverty. And we need a state that controls the economy and invests in people as an asset and invests in communities. That's what we need. We need a government of action that fights for working families. That's what we need. We need a government of action to fight for working families. And fascism is an attempt to stabilize the capitalist system. That's what you need to understand. Fascism is economics, and it is capitalism breaking down and becoming cannibalistic. That is what fascism is. So thanks, David, for asking about that. I'm glad I could bring that up and answer that question. A couple more things I wanted to talk about. One, so Kamala Harris is on a book tour right now. And it's classic, right? Kamala Harris is blaming everyone but herself for the fact that she lost the election, right? I think anyone with a brain knows why Kamala Harris lost the election. Kamala Harris sucks, right? I mean, she gave horrendous interviews. She just was an all-around dismal candidate. However, according to Kamala Harris's book, it's Biden's fault she lost the election. It's the mainstream media's fault she lost the election. It's everyone's fault but herself. But this is great. So this is what happened at a recent book event that she had, because she refused to let an Arab American speak at the Democrat convention. She pounded the podium for Israel all throughout the election, swore allegiance to Israel. She's literally married to an AIPAC lobbyist, right? I mean, she's just like the most pro-Israel person you ever met. And, but yet, she thinks that, that anyway, we know what happened, which is that Arab Americans voted for Jill Stein or just didn't vote. And some of them even voted for Trump. And so this is what happened.
Talk to your president. Talk to somebody else.
I'm not president right now. There's nothing I can do.
Yeah. So pro-Palestine people were disrupting her event. And then she just ended by saying, I'm not president now. There's nothing I can do about it. Well, you might have won the election if you'd said you were going to do something about it. Millions of Muslim Americans might have actually voted for you. But you were so bought and paid for by the Israel lobby that, they wouldn't even let an Arab American speak at the convention. And, it was so blatant that, a lot of Arab Americans voted for Jill Stein. A lot of Arab Americans voted for Trump. And, so she's got this book all about how, she lost the election because of everyone but her. And as John pointed out, there wasn't even a primary. They didn't have a primary election. Joe Biden was just anointed as the candidate. And then he was forced out. So then Kamala was anointed as the candidate. Not a single Democrat voted for Kamala Harris. And she was the candidate. And she was absolutely, absolutely awful. And as a result, she lost and Trump won. There was an element of like the Democrats think that they're entitled to win because they're normies, right? I hate to put it that way, but there's this element of like normie conformity arrogance, right? They should win because they follow all the rules. They never question anything, right? That's not how it works. It was just, they can't understand why anyone would ever vote for Trump. And there are millions of Americans who voted for Trump and they can't understand, there were so many moments during the election that were just classic. For example, she called Trump supporters garbage. And so Trump drove a garbage truck, right? She claimed to have worked at McDonald's. And it was proven she'd never worked at a McDonald's. There was not one tax record of her ever working at McDonald's. You can, people pay taxes You know, people have to, you can tell who works at McDonald's and who doesn't. There's no proof. So Trump worked at McDonald's for one day and said, look, I've worked at McDonald's longer than Kamala Harris. It was brilliant. Right. And, you know, people said, well, those were hokey gimmicks from Trump. Right. He drove the garbage truck after she called the Trump supporters garbage. He worked at McDonald's for one day. He was trying. And that's what Peter Coffin has pointed out. Trump tried. She didn't think she had to try. Kamala Harris didn't have to try. She was just supposed to win because she's the normal one. And Trump's weird. Weird. Right? You love that? Weird. You're weird. That was her argument. You know, she wasn't weird. Right? And Trump is weird. And so she should just win by default. Well, that's not how the world works. Trump was trying to win the election, and she assumed she would win because she's not weird. Look, I mean, I'll show you. This was the Oprah town hall. This is my recap of the Oprah town hall. Like, she didn't prepare. Like, she didn't do any of her homework. I mean, it was that bad. She just didn't. She assumed that she had this, right? This is like a kid, right, who doesn't study for their test. She did not rehearse or practice. She had nothing. This was her big moment, her big town hall interview with Oprah.
Us on Zoom from Pennsylvania.
Hi, Oprah. Hi, Madam Vice President. It's nice to be with you all.
Yes.
Hi.
And so, what did you want to say to the Vice President?
So, Madam Vice President, we are, like many, many young Americans, just experiencing a very high cost of living. We ended up giving up our apartment, moving in with our parents who were so gracious to take us in for over a year so that we could save money and ultimately buy a home, because that's what we thought the American dream was, to get married and buy a home and have a baby. And now here we are, and our mortgage is incredibly higher than what we thought it would be. And we really would love to know what your plan is to help lower the cost of living.
Yeah, first of all, thank you both for being here. And yours is a story I hear around the country as I travel. And in terms of both rightly having the right to have aspirations and dreams and ambitions for your family, and working hard and finding that the American dream is, for this generation and so many recently, far more elusive than it's been. And we need to deal with that. And there are a number of ways. One is bringing down the cost of everyday necessities, including groceries.
What is on your heart to say to the American people as we have 47 days until November 5th?
We love our country. I love our country. I know we all do. That's why everybody's here right now. We love our country. We take pride in the privilege of being American. And this is a moment where we can and must come together as Americans, understanding we have so much more in common than what separates us. Let's come together with the character that we are so proud of about who we are, which is we are an optimistic people. We are an optimistic people. Americans, by character, are people who have dreams and ambitions and aspirations. We believe in what is possible. We believe in what can be. And we believe in fighting for that. That's how we came into being, because the people before us understood that one of the greatest expressions for the love of our country, one of the greatest expressions of patriotism, is to fight for the ideals of who we are, which includes freedom to make decisions about your own body, freedom to be safe from gun violence, freedom to have access to the ballot box, freedom to be who you are and just be, to love who you love openly and with pride, freedom to just be. And that's who we are. We believe in all that. And so this is a moment where we stand knowing what we are fighting for. We're not fighting against. It's what we're fighting for.
Thank you. Thank you. Madam Vice.
Yeah. If you can think, if you can't understand how that could lose an election, I don't know what to tell you, right? That was a totally scripted, totally prepared $1 million. I mean, they spent millions of dollars to do the whole thing and all of that. And she epically bombed. I mean that just tells you right there everything you need to know. I mean, yeah, Oprah was like, we're doomed. Like, and the fact that she could write a book blaming other people for losing, like any candidate who did that would lose. But she assumed she would win because Trump is weird. He's weird. He doesn't follow the rules. Well, congratulations to everyone who's watching this who is weird. Congratulations to weird people, because Trump won because he's weird. Trump won because he is weird. Trump won because he's not satisfied with the status quo, because he came across like a real person on the podcast, and he wasn't just, Trump won because of the podcast. Trump came across amazing on his podcast. He sounded like a real person. And that's why he won. So, before we do the roll call and open it up for questions, I wanted to take a moment to just kind of laugh at myself, right? I wanted to laugh at myself. I am a guy who loves books and loves minutia, and I love facts, right? And that I know that, inside baseball, you ever hear the term inside baseball? It's like, people that are really, really big baseball fans, they know all kinds of stuff about world events or about baseball that we don't know. All kinds of moves, all kinds of rules, all kinds of, and if you hear two really intense baseball fans arguing, you don't know what they're talking about, right? It's inside baseball. And I love inside baseball. I'll be honest. I especially love communist inside baseball, right? I really do. I love all the minutia of different communist groups and how they fought with each other and their different beliefs and all of that. And I admit that, inside baseball is not good to focus on because most people have no idea what you're talking about. There was a beautiful moment in CPI. Two of our members, who shall not be named, one of them did a video about the rapture, right? Which is, about, the rapture, right? The Christian theory of the rapture. And so then one of our other members, who also shall not be named, posted a nuanced article going over different Bible verses explaining why he didn't believe in the rapture. And I was laughing because, this is a very inside baseball topic. And, this is a clip of, I immediately thought of a, what do you call it? A sermon that I watched where Reverend Jack Hyles, who's quite conservative, quite dedicated fundamental Baptist, who's very into fundamental Baptist inside baseball, got very fired up about something he really just didn't like, right? So here we go. This is Reverend Jack Hyles. In the middle of his sermon, he shouts this.
I'm fed up to my gizzard with this mid-tribulation rapture garbage.
He is fed up to his gizzard with mid-tribulation rapture garbage. Say it again.
I'm fed up to my gizzard with this mid-tribulation rapture garbage.
Yeah. What is that? I don't know what mid-tribulation rapture garbage is, but he's really mad about it. He's really mad about it. Just like I get really mad about PSL and Trotskyites and inside baseball, because we're weird. We're weird, and we celebrate that. We celebrate our weirdness. Here's to you. Cheers to everyone who's weird. Weird just won the election. We don't have super chats because we've been demonetized. But if you would like to send a question, there are 3 ways to send the question. 3 ways to send the question. You can send it as a Rumble rant, as Cash App 22, Caleb Maupin 22 on Cash App. But the best way to send questions is to buy me a coffee. But yeah, you can't send super chats because of the fact that that we are demonetized. So send to buy me a coffee to ask your question. Thanks for asking. But as I said, right, I am fed up. What is it?
Said I'm fed up to my gizzard with this mid-tribulation rapture garbage.
He's fed up to his gizzard with people interpreting the Bible about the end times slightly differently than he does. He can't take it anymore. It makes him mad. He's one more time. Take it away, Jack.
Said I'm fed up to my gizzard with this mid-tribulation rapture garbage.
That's right. He can't stand it. Go and stand on Fifth Avenue in New York City and shout, I'm fed up to my gizzard with that mid-tribulation rapture garbage. I enjoyed that clip. He's just a mid-tribulation rapture name dropper. Exactly. But there you go. So because I like to laugh at myself, and because we're getting towards the roll call and me answering questions and all of that, I am going to put on Cornelius Cardew. Cornelius Cardew was a famous experimental composer in Britain. Very famous. He wrote experimental music with the Stockhausen School of Experimental Music. And he had a great revelation in the early 70s, and he became a Maoist communist. And later, he became a follower of Enver Hoxha, the communist leader of Albania. And he wrote a book called Stockhausen Serves Imperialism, right? Stockhausen Serves Imperialism, where he argued that the experimental music he was doing was contrary to dialectical materialism. And he then, from there on forward, he only composed what he called people's liberation music that extolled communist themes and communist values. And that music I love. I have been listening to it for quite some time now. It's almost 20 years I've been listening. Or is it 20 years? Maybe like 15 years I've been listening to Cornelius Cardew. I absolutely love Cornelius Cardew's music because I'm laughing at myself. It's inside baseball music. It is very, very, very inside baseball. It is very, very much. He's trying to cram every obscure Marxist-Leninist principle into the lyrics. It's hilarious. And I love it because it's weird and I'm kind of laughing at myself. So I'm going to put on his song, Fight the Cuts. You'll understand as soon as you hear the lyrics. This is Cornelius Cardew's song, Fight the Cuts, right? Here, hold on. Right? This is, Fight the Cuts by Cornelius Cardew. Yeah, here it is. Sorry. Yeah, Fight the Cuts. And you will understand what I mean. It's got very, very inside baseball lyrics, and I love it. And so, yeah, here we go.
The monopoly capitalist lackey government lets finance have its way to increase their rate of profit. They make the workers pay. Fight the cuts, that's part and parcel of our class strategy. In proletarian revolution, we hold our destiny. Beware the snakes in our back pockets, false champions of our fight. Their interest is to stop class struggle and maintain capital's might. Fight the cuts, that's part and parcel of our class strategy. In proletarian revolution, we hold our destiny. The working class, it is the great to win victory. Fight the cuts, that's part and parcel of our class strategy. In proletarian revolution, we hold our destiny. Fight the cuts, that's part and parcel of our class strategy. In proletarian revolution, we hold our destiny.
Fight the cuts, that's part and parcel to our class strategy. But proletarian revolution holds our destiny. Yeah, great stuff. Great stuff. But if that wasn't enough for you, if that wasn't weird enough for you, right? If that wasn't absurd enough for you, this is another hit by Cordu called The Lords of Labor.
The Lords of Labour, they put together the bankrupt schemes to keep us down. Their message to the working class is to cringe before the rich man's frown. They say that it's in the whole country's interest to tighten our belts and make no demands, but they speak for the class that exploits us and rules us, and we must get them off our hands. Our labour power is all we have, we must sell it at the rich man's price. This system is called wage slavery, but democracy sounds a bit more polite. They say that if our wage increases, the prices will rise to compensate, but the only ones who receive compensation are capitalist vampires who suck out our life. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. The capitalists fight with one another to corner the market and divide up the world. The quest for maximum profit is the cause of war and puts us on the door. Their greed leads them into a crisis they try to resolve with a more fascist state. Our struggles against the whole capitalist system, so strike at the fascists as well as the cuts. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. Proposal attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis.
Oppose all attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. Oppose all attempts to make the working class pay for the capitalist crisis. All right. Anyhow, glad to have you all with us tonight. Let's do names and locations, and I'll start answering people's questions. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. Who's with us? Who's with us? Everyone should be singing that. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Same place. You're in the same place you were last time. All right. Auckland, New Zealand. Jenny in Cincinnati. St. David's, Bermuda. John McCarthy in Chicago. Ian Chester in England. Wow. Denver in Minnesota. It's going by so fast. Hold your horses. Woo. Wow. They don't used to come in this fast. That's good. I'm glad you all are here. All right. Ian Chester in England. Tell everyone. Okay. Ryan in Kansas City. JDL in Missouri. Kieran Pine in London Town. Denver in Minnesota. Shout out to Denver, beloved member of our community. Zachary Morrison in Berkeley, Australia. Charles in Brooklyn. Shout out to you, Charles. Nabil in Pakistan. The Seasoned Noob in China. Jacob in Wisconsin. Rose in a tent by the river. All right. Penny in Minnesota. Bill Grass in Valley, California. Gabby in Chicago. I know where everybody is by now. Marsh in Rio Vista, half California. Okay. And John in Florida. Very, very good. Great group of folks we have here. If anyone else wants to give their name or location, that would be great. Cecily in Joliet. Welcome, Cecily. Good to have you with us. John in Florida. Names and locations. Anybody else? Anybody else? Jerry in Grand Rapids. Good to have you, Jerry. Good to have you. Good to have you. All right. So we have a couple questions. We have a couple questions that have come in. Joe, the first super chat or Rumble rant or buy me a coffee is from Joe. It says, what is the history of the Antifa movement in the United States? Did it only emerge after Occupy Wall Street or Trump's first electoral victory, or was it around before that? Well, I can tell you all about that. Right? Antifa used to be a word that nobody knew unless you were like in communist circles. And people would often say Antifa. I remember when it was Antifa, it was for anti-fascism. And there was some anarchists who it was like their hobby to stalk Nazis. And, during the anti-globalization movement in the 90s, right, you had the Battle of Seattle, you had people that would protest the World Trade Organization, the International Monetary Fund. There'd be these black bloc anarchists who would go and break windows. And among the anarchists who, that was a scene, they liked punk music. They were white suburban kids who were like rebels or whatever, and they read anarchist literature and they were environmentalists or whatever. Among them, there was a thing they would do. It was almost like a recreational activity that those guys would do, which is they would stalk Nazis. And it was only Nazis. It was not Republicans. It definitely wasn't leftists who disagreed with them. They would just stalk Nazis and get into fistfights with them. There was a neo-Nazi group there were certain like neo-Nazi rock bands, and they would do rock against communism. It was called. They'd have rock against communism, and a lot of people don't like communism, but it wasn't just against communism. It was a Nazi kind of thing, right? And so rock against communism would have a concert somewhere where a bunch of Nazi bands would play. And these guys would show up in their black masks and mix it up with the Nazis and fist fight with them. And that there were a layer of these anarchists who that was like a thing that they did was, keep track of all the local Nazis, find out who they are, like make a directory of who the local Nazis were, often in coordination with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and fight with them or harass them. And communists often thought that was awesome, right? There was another communist group called the Progressive Labor Party, the PLP, and they would do that as well, the Progressive Labor Party. They would find out where the Ku Klux Klan was having a meetup, and they would show up with baseball bats and beat them up. And, it was just kind of this, recreational activity, right? That, anarchists, are fringe political elements, and they would stalk and harass this other fringe political element. It was like spy versus spy, right? It was this little subculture of like people that were Nazis, and then that it would go the other way too. The Nazis would then stalk them, right? And it was just this kind of cat and mouse game that went on between a very, 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 very fringe element of society that call themselves Nazis, and another very, 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 very fringe element of society that call themselves anarchists. And a lot of them weren't that political. They were Nazis because they liked Nazi bands. They liked, Ian Stewart, who was the punk rock guy who became a neo-Nazi, and they were skinheads, and they had Nazi tattoos, and and the anarchists weren't really anarchists because they'd read Emma Goldman or Proudhon. They were anarchists because they really liked anarchist bands, and they, wanted to be grunge and, grunge or crust punks or whatever. And it was just, I don't know, there was just an element of people being silly. I mean, I hate to put it that way. I mean, I don't want to belittle what Nazis do. I mean, they commit hate crimes and all of that, but I don't feel like the Nazis that Antifa was stalking were really committing that many hate crimes. They were just weirdo, racist dudes who traded pamphlets at gun shows. And the anarchists who were stalking them, I don't think they were, leading a revolution of the proletariat or anything like that. They were just guys who used a lot of drugs and went to punk rock shows. And I don't know. It was just this like weird subculture cat and mouse game, right? That was going on that most people, even most communists, really, they kind of admired it because they're like, oh, we don't like Nazis, but they weren't involved in it, right? It was this weird thing that happened. And I mean, there were anarchists in Cleveland that would do that. They would show up at events, with, the local Nazi here. And, it was just a thing, right? So, then it wasn't, and I remember I years ago, I think the first year that I moved to New York City was before Occupy Wall Street. There's a big May Day demonstration, right? There was a May 1st demonstration that happened. And, the march ended in Lower Manhattan in the park. And there was like some counter protesters, that were there, and they had signs like deport all illegals, because May 1st was generally considered to be for the immigrant workers, right? And so, there was the big May 1st demonstration where all the communist groups march, but it's also around immigrant rights. So down where the march ended, there were like 5 or 6 people with like American flags and signs, deport the illegals, whatever. And so I remember seeing there were like 5 or 6 of these like crust punk kids went up to the 5 or 6 counter protesters and they started chanting something. And I don't remember how it went, but it was like a weird chant. It was like, we are Antifa, 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 or something like that. And they were like doing something with their hands. It was like, I don't know. It was like some chant that they were doing, and it wasn't like a political chant. It was like, we are Antifa. And it was like, they were like, and then they were like making it like they were going to fight these guys. And these guys were, ready to fight them too. And nobody fought anybody. And it was just, these, I don't know. Yeah. Like a Buttigieg dance. It was dumb. And I looked at this and I'm like, okay, whatever, and it was just like, again, Antifa was it was like a hobby that certain anarchists had, that they stalked Nazis, and the Nazis stalked them back, and they weren't all that political. It was kind of like the punk scene. It was like Nazis were skinheads and punks were anarchists, and Nazis and punks fought each other. And it was kind of about politics because the skinheads were Nazis and the anarchists were punks. And that was that. It wasn't until like Trump got elected that I started hearing about Antifa like setting off explosives to prevent Republicans from speaking, right? And I remember like when Milo Yiannopoulos spoke, and when the Proud Boys got going, and then it got weird. And then suddenly, right, it was that Antifa was not targeting Nazis. It was targeting conservatives, right? Trump was Hitler, and Ann Coulter was Hitler, and Milo Yiannopoulos was Hitler, and they're all Hitler, and and it's necessary to be violent. And it started in Berkeley, and Berkeley and all that, and that was a totally different thing. There was a case I worked on in 2012, right? The year after Occupy Wall Street. It's funny because all the woke liberals now support NATO, but the NATO summit was held in Chicago in 2012, and all the Occupy people went to protest NATO. Good for them. I mean, it's funny that now they would all support NATO, but there was a protest against the NATO summit in Chicago, and I was there. And in Tinley Park, which is a suburb of Chicago, some neo-Nazis had a meetup at a bar. Like they rented the upstairs of a bar in Tinley Park to have a meetup about, it was the Ku Klux Klan and some skinhead groups or whatever. And some anarchists, I guess, heard about it also. And they had a pickup truck full of baseball bats and weapons, and they went up to the upstairs of the bar and beat the living hell out of these Nazis, right? And they're like trashed the place, and a bunch of them got arrested, and they did some jail time for it, for staging a mob attack. And what it was really about was heroin, right? Because the main heroin dealing gang in Indiana is a neo-Nazi gang called the Vinlander Social Club. And they're just they're a criminal organization, basically, in Indiana. And so I guess the rival heroin gang were anti-racist skinheads. And it was heroin gang versus heroin gang, basically. The more you got into it, it wasn't some glorious, epic, uprising. It was just, I don't know. It was just, it was dumb. Let me just put it that way. And I look back on it and I'm just like, okay, that was dumb. And it was, yeah, you can read about the Tinley Park incident, and the guys who did it went to jail, and some of the Nazis went to jail, and I don't know. It was just, the whole thing was dumb. But that was, again, those were actual Nazis. I guess they were tied in with a heroin gang, and they were meeting upstairs in the bar, and the people fighting them were also involved in criminal activities and heroin, but I guess they were an anti-racist heroin gang or whatever. I don't know. I look back on that and I think, was that a productive use of my time to, I went to a couple of their court hearings and stuff. I was like, was that was really productive, right? That was really productive. And, I don't know. I'm at the point where, and so then I used to have this attitude that like fascists were the biggest enemies, right? And so I'd say, but then it got to the point when I realized that, first of all, right, that there were real problems with economics the left wasn't addressing, right? That they were not talking about all the stuff that I studied: overproduction, the falling rate of profit, none of that. It was just, you're a big fat racist. They just pointed fingers at people. And the right was going around and saying, debate me. And like fascist, ideas, I shouldn't say fascist ideas, but right-wing ideas, right-wing nationalist ideas were being promoted. And the left, their only response was to threaten to beat people up. And, and it got to the point that I realized, and then pretty soon I was a fascist, which I'm not a fascist, but I was on the list. Oh, he's a fascist. And I was getting threats from Antifa and all of this. And I don't know. And so, now I actually think very negatively of Antifa. The other thing I've pointed out about Antifa is that, okay, so there's a lot of college kids who like find out that a Republican is speaking and they show up wearing a mask and holding a sign like fuck fascism or whatever. And they claim they're Antifa. And I mean, whatever. However, there is kind of a network that exists that is connected to intelligence, I am convinced, that kind of stalks Nazis, right? And it stalks them. And, and it's got like police connections to some degree or other. And it's also very, very anti-Russia, right? And it's quiet, it's not a huge, loud network, right? But it exists, right? And they basically threaten and harass anyone who's pro-Russia now. They didn't used to do that. And they kind of, they will go and send people to actually violently attack Nazis, right? Or other people. There is some kind of like quiet intelligence linked network of people, right? And so when people say Antifa is not an organization, they're technically right. But there is something that is kind of secretive. And yeah, it does look very Fed connected, that, is going around and violently intimidating certain people. And also, very much, there's this guy, Alex Reed Ross. Do you know the name Alex Reed Ross? Well, Alex Reed Ross was this guy who was obsessed with claiming that somehow anyone who supports Russia or anyone who supported the Syrian government was actually a Nazi, right? And he launched character assassination campaigns against me and all kinds of other people. And he was proven to be tied into American intelligence. You know, Google Alex Reed Ross. Gray Zone did great work exposing Alex Reed Ross. Alex Reed Ross was a professor in, I think, was it Seattle or Portland, up around there. And he wrote an article about me in Haaretz, Haaretz newspaper for Israel, right? Go and read the article about me in Haaretz. And it's written very carefully to give the impression that I'm a Nazi, right? And, you know, it's cherry-picked quotes and all of this. But you can go read this article. Haaretz, Caleb Maupin. Go and read the article in Haaretz, you know, where basically it was an article to dox everyone who went to this conference in Iran that I went to, including Medea Benjamin and some other people. And it's in the Zionist newspaper, the official Israeli state newspaper. The New York Times of Israel published this hate article about me. And I get an honorable mention. Mostly it's not about me, but there's a paragraph about me in the article, and it's going to make me pay to read the articles. I'm not going to, you know, I guess I won't read you the paragraph. You know, but I get a paragraph in the article, and it basically says that communists on the internet, it quotes like obscure communist blogs calling me fascist. And then it says I had a debate with Augustus Sol Invictus, which is a debate, meaning I don't agree with him. And then they quote him saying something about the Holocaust that I obviously didn't say. And it's designed to make you read it. If you read it fast, you would think I said the thing about the Holocaust. You would think, you know, and it's this is how these people operate, and it's very slimy and all of that. And like Alex Reed Ross, if you read about Alex Reed Ross, this guy Alex Reed Ross, who's kind of disappeared, right, ever since Gray Zone kind of exposed him, you know, he's kind of vanished. But he basically made a career accusing anti-imperialists of being Nazis, right? And, you know, and that's kind of what he did. And this was intelligence work, you know, and he was working with the CIA. He was working with the Department of Homeland Security, you know, and it was pretty nasty, right? Yeah, it was pretty wild. And they went after Norman Finkelstein. They went after everybody. Yeah, very interesting. So, you know, take a look at that. I mean, so generally Antifa, I remember years ago, Antifa was just something these weird anarchists did. Then it turned into all these people protesting Republicans. And then there is kind of like a shady intelligence connected like network that's not really about fascism. It's about harassing dissidents, basically. It goes after pro-Russian people. It goes after people on the right wing. It goes after, I don't know. It's just whatever. And, you know, I've been targeted. You know, hey, look, you want to see Antifa? We're calling these people Antifa, right? We didn't want to call them that at first, but, you know, they were chanting that we're fascists. This is what happened. Back in February, Penny organized a great workshop in Minneapolis, and it was still a great workshop, but this is what happened.
We went out to Minneapolis to do just kind of a routine, small workshop that we do in a number of cities. We've done them before, where we get together, have some classes, get to know different members, different friends. Anyhow, we get out there and we see all these crazy signs posted up all over the neighborhood.
Let's not alert the membership as of yet, right? Because they want a reaction. If they see they're getting a reaction, that'll embolden them, right? We'll just be extra careful with security at the door. But honestly, I don't think we should not do the event. No, I think we should do it. I guess we'll just proceed with our meeting as usual. Okay, so the first thing is that the break time is the most important, right? The break time when we're actually talking to people is the most important time, right? Actually, when I'm speaking and all of that, it's not that important. What's important is when we're talking with the people.
On Saturday morning, our main concern was the lack of heat. The Airbnb had not turned the heat on, and it was record low temperatures. It was a very, very cold night, so we're inside the house, and we're figuring we can't really start the workshop until the heat comes on. So then we see them outside.
Burger King! Burger King! Burger King! Burger King! Burger King! Burger King!
It is
8:30 in the morning.
And it's like 20 below zero.
You're gonna wake up the whole neighborhood.
Yeah.
Everyone's in the neighborhood's gonna hate them.
The house across the street looks abandoned or dilapidated. I don't think they're worried about fascism. They're worried about putting food on the table.
We're worried about getting the heat turned on.
Yes,
It's a little cold here. The heat hasn't been turned on in our Airbnb.
And these guys start preemptively gloating that nobody is showing up.
No, we expect to be like turning the attendees away. This is amazing. It seems like no one is coming. Wow.
Not knowing that we literally don't have heat, and we're not gonna start the thing without heat. It was actually like a solid hour after they left before we got the heat, and then we had people start coming. Well, actually, I take that back. There was one gentleman they did get to try to intimidate out of attending, a disabled gentleman, which, you know, that's cool.
They shouted at him, "Don't go in there, they'll rape you."
He attended, though. He was not scared of them.
Hello, Gabby.
I've seen you. I've seen you.
Can we see what they gave you?
Hello.
Can we see what they gave you?
Morning, this is a cult. Press TV. Oh, wow. It's Dugan.
Press TV.
Oh, man. Linda LaRouche. And your name's on here, too.
Really?
Yeah.
What? Famous.
Right? You're a failed political candidate and dedicated follower of Caleb Maupin's.
You know, we're inside and like laughing about it. The whole thing just looked completely insane. At 8:30 in the morning, in record cold temperatures, you have 15 kids out there wearing COVID masks with signs about spanking and fascism and cults. I mean, the whole thing just had to look completely insane.
What are they saying?
Maupin runs the CPI. He's a weird little guy.
One of the chants that they had, which I absolutely loved, was Caleb owns CPI. He's a weird little guy.
Caleb runs the CPI. He's a weird little guy.
They're calling you weird, dancing around with signs that no one understands.
Now, I thought that was very funny.
And by the way, don't you find some of their stuff to just be plain weird?
At one point, Peter Coffin walked out among the protesters. I immediately thought of the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy wakes up and she's walking among the munchkins.
Come out, wherever you are.
Because they were all like really short in comparison to him. And it made me think that the guy on the bullhorn or one of the people that had thought of that chant, they must have been called a weird little guy at some point in their life.
You're so out of touch. You think CPUSA would be a viable force to put together a picket like this? It's amazing.
They were on the bullhorn talking about communist inside baseball.
Colt, I mean, you started in the RCP, so it's used to Colt.
Gospels were a joke even to Trots.
No, we're trying to show you we care enough to tell you guys what's going on here. We want you guys to get out of the cult. We're trying to show you we care enough. No, we're trying to show you we care enough to tell you guys what's going on here. We want you guys to get out of the cult.
We are gonna have some fun with them, but we don't want to be too mean to them because there's a lot of people in this organization around the country, and I'm not gonna violate anyone's private business, but more than a handful of people that have joined CPI that have told me why they joined CPI. And they said, Caleb, you know, I was in these communist circles, I was in my 20s, and I was using drugs. I rock bottomed. You know, I screwed up, I did something wrong, and, you know, I had to go into recovery. And I realized that if I was gonna get over my addiction, I couldn't keep thinking in the pessimistic, dark, hopeless way that seems to accompany communist politics in America. I had to be optimistic. And I suddenly started hearing you, and you were the only communist I could stand to listen to anymore. You were the only one that was putting out a hopeful, optimistic message that wasn't tearing people down, that wasn't preaching resentment. I believe there were people out there that are in that same category. Do you know what I honestly believe deep in my soul? I believe that there were people out there today that will eventually join CPI. Let me just put it this way. You can never say that the Center for Political Innovation or myself or Peter, you can never say that we're irrelevant. The fact that we had a small meetup was so important to some people that they woke up on Saturday morning, went out in freezing cold temperatures, and made a huge ruckus to tell everyone just how upset they were about the fact that we exist and we continue to do our work. We were ready to defend ourselves, but they weren't a threat to us at all. They were kind of embarrassing, and they were kind of clowns. And I'm embarrassed for whatever organization let this happen, was involved in making it happen. And I'm also embarrassed for the people that did this protest, because you were out there making fools out of yourselves while we were inside talking about the serious issues and how to change the future of our country, how to fight against imperialism, globalism, how to fight for working families. So yeah, certainly an interesting trip to Minneapolis. I'm glad we were there, and we're going to do a lot more workshops, let me put it that way.
Yeah, that was really cool. It was a great compliment to get protested. So that's our Antifa encounter of the year for the year. So all right. So the next question is from John McCarthy. He says, Kamala supporters are saying, why aren't the Palestine protesters protesting Trump? But Jill Stein was at the UN opposing Trump's veto of the ceasefire. Where was Kamala? Where were the Democrats? Exactly. Right. I saw Jill Stein at the United Nations with Roger Waters. She was there. Yeah, that's true. John also says, if Kamala wants to sell any of those books, she should try to get Amazon to ban them. Yeah, and our book on Kamala Harris, that is one of the great things that CPI did. We put out a book. We had barely done much as CPI. And, in 2020, I put out a book on Kamala Harris the day she got the nomination. They banned it from Amazon, and suddenly we were the center of the conversation. That was great. That was awesome. And we will continue to do what we do. CPI is really something special. And, all of you are a part of this, right? I mean, look at what Noah just did in Russia. Wasn't that awesome? That was tremendous. So, all right. The next question is from Shanti. Shanti says, hi, Caleb. Good night. There's a lot of people trying to call China's system state capitalism. But that seems for me like a way to hide that China is indeed socialist. What do you think about that? Also, I am very mad at the way Trump and the USA have been trying to harm China's partners, Russia, India, and Venezuela lately. He hasn't stopped any war. Yes, Trump's foreign policy, he keeps hinting that he might do something good, but he hasn't done it yet. He hasn't done it yet. And so far, he's been threatening Venezuela. So far, he's said he was going to end the war in Ukraine, and he hasn't done it. He's been giving Israel a blank check. He's bombed Iran. Trump's presidency so far has been largely a disappointment on many, many levels. No doubt about it. Now, as far as China being state capitalist, right? What does state capitalism mean? Well, what does capitalism mean? Capitalism is a system where production is organized to maximize the profits of private owners. China is not capitalist, even though it has a huge market sector, because the state controls the means of production. They have a huge amount of state-run industries. They have 5-year economic plans, and profits are not in command. State capitalism is a term that gets thrown around, and it refers to a capitalist system in which the state is heavily involved. Now, state capitalism would be Saudi Arabia, for example. Saudi Arabia is a capitalist country, largely oil, that's privately owned, and the royal family owns it, and they get profits from that oil. They do distribute the profits among different people in the royal family. They get like a check, basically. They get an oil stipend, for different people, depending on how well connected you are to the royal family. But the Saudi economy is almost entirely run by the state, but it's used to maximize profit. Singapore, right? The state is very, very, very heavily involved in running the economy, but there are about 4 families that run Singapore, and the economy works to maximize profits for them. But at the same time, it's still, making profits for them, but it's run by the state. The state is heavily involved. The difference between capitalism and socialism is not government involvement, right? And, I don't know. I mean, when the bread tube world was going, like I explained over and over and over again this, and people just lie and distort, right? the difference between capitalism and socialism is, why is production being carried out? If profits are in command, the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, that's capitalism. If society as a whole takes control of the means of production and the state controls the economy to ensure growth, not to maximize profit for people in the state, but to actually ensure growth, that's not capitalism, right? And here's where this gets confusing. Another argument that people that argue that China or other countries are state capitalist is they say, well, look, in the Communist Party leadership, there's people that make 10 times what average workers make. There's people who make 100 times what average workers make. Well, that's a privileged bureaucracy. That's not capitalism, right? Capitalism is people who make profits from labor, right? They make more than average workers make, but it comes out of the same surplus. And that the relationship of the bureaucracy to the worker is very different. Your employer is turning your labor into profit. So the less you get paid for the work that you do, the more money he makes, right? And he wants to sell as many products as he can. He wants to pay you as little as he possibly can. That's capitalism. The Soviet bureaucrat, he wants the country to become more prosperous overall so that his share that he takes as his compensation for a bureaucracy can get higher. A bureaucrat is almost like a union boss, right? A union boss, right? He's not the same as a regular boss because he wants your wages to go up. He wants you to make more money because he gets a percentage of your wages and dues. The state bureaucrat in the USSR wants the USSR to get richer because the chunk that he gets as his payment for being the bureaucrat goes up. And that a bureaucracy that is paid, that is privileged, is not the same as a capitalist class because they're not exploiting labor, right? They're not turning labor power into profit by producing commodities to sell. That's not what they do, right? They're presiding over a planned economy and they're getting very large compensation for it, you could argue, but they're not making profit, right? And so people who think, well, these socialist countries are all state capitalists, this is like an ultra leftist. It kind of blows my mind how much the universities have gone out of their way. They've read through Marx and they're like, how can we reinterpret this to not be the Soviet Union, right? And it's like they have really just the little technicalities, the little things. How can we come up with a version of this? And so it's like, well, the state capitalism argument, right, is that, well, Marx wants individual workers to control individual workplaces. That's not what he wants, right? That's but it's this. They've decided, well, workers controlling the means of production means individual workplaces are controlled by democratic workers' councils, right? And that didn't exist in the Soviet Union. So what is the Soviet Union? Well, the Soviet Union is just capitalism because there's employees and employers, right? And it's run by the state. Well, that's none of that, right? Marx wrote, for example, right? What does the Communist Manifesto say? The proletariat must seize the political power and win the battle for democracy, and then centralize the instruments of production into the hands of the state, and then raise the productive forces as rapidly as possible. Nowhere does it say individual workers seize their individual workplace, right? But Marx does spend a lot of time talking about how the wage worker and the factory owner or the employer, it's an unequal relationship. So if you make that the essence of what Marx said, and then you say, well, it's not a struggle for political power, which he clearly was saying it was a struggle for political power. It's just a struggle to make the worker and the employer equal, or to break down the unfairness between the worker and the employer. You say that, and then you look at the Soviet Union and you say, well, look, the worker in the Soviet Union was not equal to the government bureaucrat who ran his industry, but they both worked for the government. Oh, that's state capitalism. Well, they're taking from Marx. Marx spent a huge amount of time explaining that the problem with capitalism is that they're trying to maximize profits and that it has a crisis of overproduction, and that what you have to do is you centralize the means of production so that you can raise productive forces and everyone can get wealthier and you don't have these problems of overproduction. The people who talk about state capitalism, they have never heard of overproduction, and they've never heard the term anarchy of production. They've never heard the term tendency of the falling rate of profit. They don't know any of that. All they know is this is what they teach in the colleges. Worker and employer, it's unfair. And it was unfair in the Soviet Union between wage worker and, government bureaucrat who ran the factory. So then that's state capitalism. They don't understand that the essence of capitalism is profits in command. That's the essence of capitalism. They don't understand that, right? And that's what, Frederick Engels said. Read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific. Right? In that pamphlet, Frederick Engels makes pretty clear production upon a predetermined plan, socialism, the irrationality of the market, profits in command, capitalism. It has nothing to do with, it's not how much the individual worker gets to vote on what goes on in his workplace. It's not how equal it is between the boss in the factory and the assembly line worker. All of that stuff is very, it's, again, they go out of their way to not see what Marx actually wrote and to really, and that they take phrases and there is a paycheck if you can interpret Marxism in a way that aligns with U.S. imperialism, and there is a boycott if you interpret Marxism in a way that aligns yourself with the countries struggling against imperialism. And I've talked on here about the Frankfurt School and all of this. And so, go and read Socialism, Utopian, and Scientific by Frederick Engels. Go and read the Communist Manifesto. Go and read, anything put out by the Communist Party USA towards Soviet America, back in the day, why Communism by Moishe Olgin. You read these old pamphlets. It's a struggle to take control of the state, and the state plans out the means of production to eliminate unemployment, to raise productive forces, increase the wealth of society. It is not a struggle to make sure the individual worker seizes the individual factory and they have workplace democracy or whatever. That's not what's going on there. And that the only way you can build a society of equality is to eliminate scarcity. This is the quote of Marx that I always come back to, right? Critique of the Goethe Program is a very good piece by Marx, in which he debunks a lot of this, right? Because there were a lot of people, even in Marx's day, that were running around, saying, the worker is going to get paid the full value of his labor and all that. And Marx made clear he was not in favor of the redistribution of wealth. He said, in a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished, after labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, after the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly. Only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society put onto its banners from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. Right? Only then. Only then. Meaning that the only way you're ever going to have equality is with abundance, right? And that capitalism has this problem of overproduction, that abundance creates poverty and it breaks down and it can't keep building abundance. However, if you rationally organize the economy, you centralize the means of production upon a predetermined plan, centralizing the instruments of production into the hands of the state after you won the battle for democracy, then you can unleash the productive forces and you can create abundance. And that is the road to building a society of equality. You cannot create equality in poverty. And all these people, they just spend all their time talking about, well, workers and employers, it's not fair. That's true, but that's not the point, right? It's about the irrationality of the market. So anyway, I hope that this is helpful, Shanti. But you can explain, why does China's economy keep growing, right? I want to, this song here, I'll put on, I will put this song on for you. This song tells you why China is socialist, right? Right. I mean, this is a great song. It's 9 years old now. It's been 9 years this song has been out, right? They've got a whole new 5-year plan that's well into completion. This song, right? This song explains why China is socialist, right? If our government was doing this, and planning out the economy, it would be socialist too, right? This video, this song for children that China made to explain their economy, which I absolutely love. I find it to be very catchy, right? Explains the difference between capitalism and socialism. So yeah, I will put this on. I hope this is helpful. So hold on, hold your horses. All right. And again, I have no use for the woke Western left, but I think what China has achieved with its socialism with Chinese characteristics is very admirable. And that, that makes me the incarnation of evil, according to the left, So, all right, here we go. All right, where's the video? All right, just got to put the video on. Oh, here it is. Okay, here we go.
Hey, have you guys heard what's going on in China?
President Xi Jinping's new style?
Yes, and there's more.
The Shisanu. The what?
China's 13th five-year plan. Yeah, the Shisanu.
Oh.
Every 5 years in China, man, they make a new development plan. The time has come for number 13. Shisanu, that's what it means.
It's a huge deal. Like how huge?
Huge.
Like China huge?
Yeah, China huge.
Oh, that's really big.
If you wanna know what China's gonna do, best pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu.
The Shisanu what?
The Shisanu.
But who makes all the plans?
There's government ministers and think tank minds and party leadership contributing fines. There's doctors, bankers, and farmers too, and even engineers who deal with poo.
Ew, did I hear that right?
Yeah, it's true. Chorus.
If you wanna know what China's gonna do, best pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu.
The Shisanu what?
The Shisanu.
But how do they make all the plans?
First there's research, views collected, then discussion and views projected. Reports get written and passed around. Then there's actually more research and more discussion and more research and more discussion. Like at every level. Over and over, like through hundreds of rounds. It's
okay, we got it. Hundreds of rounds. Oh my god.
Crazy, right? Okay, 1, 2, 3.
If you wanna know what China's gonna do, best pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu.
The Shisan what?
The Shisanu.
But it's not over yet. When the plan comes out, the work's not done. In fact, it's really just begun. Because every province, county, city, too, have got to figure out what they're gonna do. Whoa.
That's a lot to do.
I know.
Hey, what's it called again?
The Shisanu.
If you wanna know what China's gonna do, best pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu.
The Shisan what?
The Shisanu.
Then the plans keep getting even better. As the plan goes down from high to low, the government's experience continues to grow. They have to work hard and deliberate, because a billion lives are all at stake.
Like every 赵钱孙李周吴郑王冯钱楚魏蒋沈
Chorus! If you wanna know what China's gonna do, best pay attention to the Shisanu. The Shisanu. The Shisanu. Everybody's talking about the Shisanu.
So that's it.
That's it?
Yeah, now it's time to get ready for the 14th five-year plan.
What?
Yeah, the Shisu.
The Shisu what?
Yep. So there you go. There you go. All right. So now we're going to do the Rumble rants. So Leo Messi says There's a song from Somalia in the 80s that's going viral now on TikTok. Wasn't Somalia in the 80s a communist country, but sided with China and the US in the Ogaden War? Okay. So I am very familiar with Ethiopia and the Ethiopia-Eritrea conflict. I am not as familiar with Somalia. So at one point, Somalia and Eritrea were part of Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was the kingdom of Emperor Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie, I think he was overthrown. And then the Derg came to power in 1978 in Ethiopia. At which point, the Marxist-Leninist separatist movements in Eritrea and Somalia and other places started aligning with China. And that was an example of like the proxy wars where the Maoist communists were on one side, right. As a result of that, hold on. I think I'm just going to block somebody. I hate to do this, but it's better to just, right. It's just better to just block some people. Well, I don't know. Or just sit there. I don't know. Twitter is a mess. Twitter is a mess. That's all I can say. All right. I'm sorry. Sometimes I have to get distracted. So yes, there was a Marxist-Leninist government in Somalia at one time. I'm not as familiar with that history. I know about Eritrea and I know about the Derg in Ethiopia and all of that. But it's interesting. You tell me there's a song going viral from Somalia in the 80s. I'll have to check that out. That's all I can say about that, Leo Messi. I'll have to check that out. All right. The Canadian government removing natives from their lands to build pipelines. Is that fascism? Well, do you want it to be fascism? I mean, I think removing natives from their lands was part of primitive accumulation. I mean, that happened just to lay the basis for capitalism. So there's that, right? I mean, the U.S. Constitution allows for what they call eminent domain, which means the government can seize anyone's land for anything. And then the Supreme Court said they can seize your land and give it to a private corporation simply to increase tax revenue, right? That was a Supreme Court ruling that came out where they said eminent domain, the government can seize property if it will and give it to a private company, even just because that'll increase tax revenue. I mean, you can argue that's bad, but is that fascism? The fact that the Canadian government might seize land to build pipelines, is that fascism? I mean, no, because that's the normal functioning of capitalism in and of itself. That's just, capitalist government seizing land from people in order to advance the profits of corporations. That's something that is like enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. We've been seizing property and land from indigenous people since we've been here. I mean, it's bad. I'm not for it. But is that fascism? I mean, no, right? Fascism is capitalism breaking down and cannibalizing itself. That's just the normal functioning of, that's just the capitalist system. That's just how things work, right? Harris was chosen precisely because she's emotionally stunted and intellectually limited, power-hungry narcissist. Karavnos, have you read my book on Kamala Harris, the book that went viral during the election and all of that? Go read my book. I did a whole psychoanalysis of Kamala Harris. I argue she's a sadistic narcissist. I have a whole analysis of Kamala Harris and her personality. I did long interviews about the book, etc. Penny says the Union of Sahel States has quit the International Criminal Court, citing that it's a tool of neocolonial oppression. They called out impunity with Israel and terrorists. I used to work for Ramsey Clark, and Ramsey Clark was one of the biggest opponents of the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because he said that it, if there had been any notion of creating an ICC when the UN was formed, would never have been a United Nations. every single person convicted by the ICC has been African. Every single one. Now, people say, well, what about Yugoslavia? That wasn't the ICC. That was the International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia before the ICC had been formed in The Hague. So first, they had the International Criminal Tribunal on Yugoslavia. And yes, those people were not African. They were Eastern European. However, after that, the ICC was formed. Every single person they've convicted has been African. It is completely illegitimate as an institution. There is no legal basis for someone to set up a court that has, control of the whole world. It's not legal. And the U.S. government has basically said that not only does the USA not recognize it, but if they were to ever indict any of them, the U.S. government will bomb The Hague. Right? I mean, it's like the USA is very threatened by the ICC. George Soros is one of the main creators of the ICC. And the ICC is a project of European capital, right? It's a project of the European mainland, etc. And a lot of the American capitalists find it to be threatening, mainly Republicans who find it threatening, but they're right. The ICC is a completely illegitimate institution. And every so often, to give themselves legitimacy, they make noise against America. They make noise against Israel. But when they take action, the people that they imprison are always people in the developing world. And it's largely people that are, at odds with French colonialism in Africa. It's very odd. It's a project that is not completely the project of Britain and America, like so much of the international institutions are. It's more the project of France and Belgium and Germany, and that's why Soros is so heavily involved with it. But it's not a legitimate entity, right? It's not legitimate, and the International Criminal Court should not exist. And on that note, folks, I am going to say goodnight, but I'll be back probably tomorrow. So I'll talk to you all soon. We're just going to keep doing these streams. Thanks to everyone who sent questions. And we'll be back.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.